the culture is far from God. Now, that doesn't mean God doesn't have a people. There's a people in this country that love him, and there's no question about it. We're probably about 20 to 30 million strong in a nation of 320 million. There's a lot of people that profess Christianity in the country today, but they can't even define what it is. Christianity, the word Christian has become so diluted. The average person who professes to be a Christian, I'm afraid, doesn't know enough Bible to even understand what it is to come to Christ. Now, there's a large percentage of our people that claim to be Christian, but in that larger group, there's a subgroup. There's a real group of authentic believers. We're not 100 million strong. Probably 20 to 30, maybe a little more. And I could be wrong. I hope I am. I certainly want people to be saved and know the Lord. But my point is, when you look at America, what I see, and I hate to say this, the country's been in decline for 50 years. And we haven't turned that around. Morally, spiritually, we have been in decline. We are a debtor nation tonight. I'm so glad the economy's doing better. This is good news. I rejoice that there's more jobs and people have a sense of hope, and this is excellent. We all are happy about it. I pray that perhaps we can head in a different direction. Perhaps we can start paying down some debt, but unfortunately, the national debt just topped $21 trillion now. In the next 10 to 15 years, if we don't stop this madness, we're going to approach $40 trillion. I don't know how that happens. I just don't know how that can happen. The consumer debt's still going up. All I'm trying to say is your Bible teaches you that when you're the head and not the tail, you lend, you don't borrow. When you're the tail, you're the borrower. You're the debtor. We used to be the head, we're the tail. And it's not changing. Now, there's some things moving in our world tonight that may have a tremendous impact upon the country. Perhaps, I know this, the Lord can use things that look like they're going to cause great upheaval or cause a lot of problems. He can really turn that and use it for our good. So when I share this little news article here, this insight from this gentleman here, it's just telling you something that's really happening in our world, and it could have some really far-reaching impact on the country. I'm thinking it might be a negative, but you know what, Brother Fred? The Lord might mean it for good. So we can hope to that end. It'll take me about 5 minutes, 6, 7 minutes to quote this gentleman. It won't take too long. But the headline reads, China is days away from killing the petrodollar. Now just listen with interest, and you might gain some insight that you didn't know before. But anyway, article written by a gentleman named Nick Giambruno. And it appeared, let's see, that would be today. He just wrote it today, the 21st. Quoting, not long ago, there was a popular joke in China that went something like, now I can't say these names properly, so if you guys can correct me and tell me how to say it, it'd be great. Who is Xi Jinping? The answer was the husband of Ping Luyan, the famous singer Xi is married to. Well, today, Xi, X-I, I hope I'm saying that right. Forgive me, I'm going to say Xi, is China's president. He leads 1.4 billion people, and he'll likely be the most powerful person in the world soon. As I mentioned recently in an article, he says, Trump's new steel and aluminum tariffs are part of a larger escalating battle between the U.S. and China. China is rapidly displacing the U.S. as the dominant global power. This shift is inevitable. China's economy will be twice as large as the U.S. economy by 2030. This leaves the U.S. with limited options. Number one, it could kick back and let China displace it as the most powerful nation. Or number two, it could start a military war with China, Or number three, it could push the current trade battle into an all-out economic war against China. Now, I want to just stop here and insert something that you guys are probably onto. This gentleman, in my opinion, now I say this not harshly or to be mean, I don't know he knows the Lord at all. So I put him in the category of a worldling. But you know something about worldlings? They know about this world. And a lot of times, because this is their world, this is about it, man. They eat and drink and breathe. They know more about what's going on, and they can kind of see the handwriting on the wall a lot of times before Christians, because a lot of times we're not even paying attention to such things. And quite honestly, we're not of the same spirit. You know, Brother Dan, I sleep good at night, but I don't worry about the world. But at the same time, we would be wise as Christians to pay attention to what's going on. China, 40, 50 years ago, was kind of a backward country. But this nation, it has exploded in the last 20 years especially. They're very wealthy. They're of course, a communist country. They don't have the freedoms we have, and yet their people have learned to work. I read something that's not in this article, and I'll pick up quoting this again in a moment. There's something I learned about the Chinese people just a few weeks ago. Brother Dave, the average Chinese person saves 30% of their income. Isn't that interesting? And I thought, you know, it doesn't matter how much they're making or relative to us or any other body. You save 30% of your income, and that means that you are accumulating capital. It's great, communist people accumulating capital. Well, that's what savings is. That's really what capitalism is. You save, and then that money can be used for all kinds of things. But I just find that astounding. 1.4 billion people, and the most of them saving 30%, and the average American today saves zero. Which nation do you think will be the economic power in a few years? The ones that are broke or the ones who have some money? Excuse me, I've been losing my hair because I scratch my head so much. Things are kind of simple, and they're not always terribly spiritual, but they are practical and what I would say Book of Proverbs kind of wisdom. You can put two and two together. These two countries are headed in two different directions for different reasons, I guess. Now, I'm quoting again. This gentleman writes, I think a full-blown economic war is the most likely. Under President Trump, it's all but certain. That said, the Trump administration seems to underestimate China's position in both the short and long term. Now, these are opinions, and just listen with interest. I wouldn't say I necessarily agree with everything, but it's interesting. For decades, the U.S. has been able to exclude virtually any country it wants from international trade. Right now, if one country wants to trade with another, it basically needs U.S. permission first. You say, how? Okay, here we go. That's because for a short while longer, the U.S. dollar is the world's most important currency. The U.S. Navy also dominates the world's oceans, controlling most major shipping lanes. But China is building a new international system. Now, this has been happening. It will affect our lives. I think you might want to be interested in this to a point anyway. Eventually, it will let China and its trading partners totally bypass the U.S. And as I'll explain shortly, a key piece is set to fall into place on March 26th. That's 5 days from now. History's biggest infrastructure project. Now, maybe you guys knew about this. If I ever did, I surely didn't pay attention to it, but this is a phenomenal thing that's been unfolding. The new Silk Road is the centerpiece of China's new plan. In the coming months and years, it will include high-speed rail lines, modern highways, fiber optic cables, energy pipelines, seaports, and airports. It will link the Atlantic shores of Europe to the Pacific shores of Asia. They're building this. China expects to have its new Silk Road fully up and running by 2025. That's only 7 years or less. This is history's biggest infrastructure project. The whole point is to completely redraw the world economic map. If it's successful, and it most likely will be, China will dominate Eurasia. President Xi announced the $1.4 trillion plan in late 2013. When it's done, a train leaving Beijing will be able to reach London in only 2 days. Keep in mind, the Chinese are careful long-term planners. When they make a strategic decision of this magnitude, they totally commit. Take their road system, for example. Between 1996 and 2016, China built 2.6 million miles of road, including 70,000 miles of highway. In just 20 years, it built far more highway than the U.S. has in its entire existence. Now, you know, some of this is the fact that China is just flat out big. Big old landmass, but 1.4 billion. That's 4 times our population. Over 4 times our population. That's just a big, big country. They're not backward anymore. They can basically stand on their own 2 feet. You know, I've always thought, well, China needs America. Well, in some regard, any nation that builds things needs America because we still consume the most of any country in the world, so we're the big market. But when you have 1.4 billion and they start consuming things, it's not too long. You can say, well, bye-bye, America. We don't need you anymore. And anyway, these are just interesting things. I'll get to the main point when we close in just a few minutes. In other words, the Chinese get things done. They have the political might along with the financial, technological, and physical resources to make the new Silk Road happen. With iron-willed President Xi at the helm, I have no doubt they'll pull it off. Not long from now, the new Silk Road will help China unseat the U.S. as the world's dominant global power and totally upend the geopolitical paradigm. But before that happens, within the next couple of weeks actually, China is introducing a way for anyone who buys or sells oil to opt out of the U.S.-dominated global monetary system. One of the things that I've learned over time, perhaps you know this better than I, but America has enjoyed such a tremendous high standard of living compared to the rest of the world for one primary reason. We, since the end of World War II, have held the world's reserve currency. Our money, our U.S. dollar, has been the world's reserve currency. We won the war. Our economy boomed. And the nations of the world have been compelled to do business with America, or you don't do business much of anything. You got to use dollars to interact in the international marketplace because we've been the reserve currency. That has allowed America the unprecedented privilege of borrowing themselves into oblivion. Because whoever controls the reserve currency, if they take a notion, they can print money. The day that we are no longer the world's reserve currency is the day Americans will discover, hey, our government can't print money like they did before. There's a lot of other variables, but it's not really oversimplistic to summarize it that way. The fact that our money has been the world's reserve currency has given this country tremendous privilege. And unfortunately, those days are numbered. I mean, I say unfortunately. I don't know exactly how it all play out. Perhaps, as I said at the beginning, the Lord can actually use this for our good. Personally, and I hate to say this, but I don't think anything can wake America except financial catastrophe. I don't believe anything else will do it. I remember back in 9/11, 01, when we had the terrible 9/11 event, the Sunday after that, this building was full of people. I still remember it. I'm not kidding. It was like an Easter Sunday. Every seat, there wasn't a seat that wasn't filled. Didn't take but a few years for that to wane. What is it that gets people's attention? People get comfortable. People get complacent. People get carried away with their sins and they don't feel any need to repent. And the preacher can preach and 10,000 preachers, 100,000 across the country can preach till they're blue in the face, and the culture won't listen, the people won't listen, nobody repents. But I tell you what, when you can't get your next meal, that generally gets your attention. Or when you have a calamity and you realize, you know what, we're vulnerable. We're not high and mighty. You know what? I might die tomorrow. I might have to face God tomorrow. It's when things are good and people are comfortable and complacent, you can't hardly get their attention. But when trouble comes, there's a wide open opportunity then for the church to minister and for people perhaps to experience revival and for there to be genuine